Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable event. My name is Hannah Shona, and I am with the Human Rights and Poverty team at UN House Scotland. UN House Scotland is a civil society organisation committed to strengthening the implementation of the UN goals and values at grassroots levels. Together with the Poverty Truth community, we are delighted to host and organise this roundtable. The Poverty Truth community is a movement for change led by people living with poverty. They work towards overcoming poverty in Scotland, believing that poverty will only truly be addressed when those who experience it firsthand are at the heart of the process for change. Over the past few months, we have been working in collaboration on a project focused on child poverty and human rights in Scotland towards the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty on the 17th of October this year. It is crucial that we come together today to discuss the issue that is child poverty in Scotland. Currently, more than 1 in 4 children in the country are officially recognised as living in poverty, and this figure is likely to continue increasing in the next decade if there are no significant changes in policy. The COVID-19 pandemic has only worsened the situation, as families living in poverty are put under further financial strain from reduced working hours, furlough, and job loss. It is critical that we recognise child poverty as a rights-based issue, and that we take action now to prevent further increase in child poverty. Humanitarian principles must be the foundation and building block for discussions on this issue. Indeed, poverty is a violation of a child's rights. Prior to the start of our event today, all those who registered to our roundtable via Eventbrite should have received our legal briefing paper written by Will Thompson, a core member of our team. The link to the briefing paper can be found in the chat box in a moment, and we highly encourage you to take a look at this when you have time. The paper provides a summary to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child Bill, which aims to ensure that children's rights are respected and protected in the law in Scotland through the incorporation of the Convention into Scots law. It is this theme of poverty and children's rights that we hope to explore and discuss with you all today at our roundtable. Over the course of our event, we will look at the issues surrounding child poverty and human rights in Scotland, hearing from members of the Poverty Truth community, Making Rights Real, and the Office of the Children and Young Commissioners for Scotland. We'll hear a statement from the Tackling Child Poverty Strategy Unit on behalf of the Scottish Government, ministers, and bring these thoughts to our breakout rooms, where you will have the opportunity to express your thoughts and opinions. Any questions you may have for our speakers can be put into the chat box at any time during the event, and we will then present those questions to our speakers at the Q&A after we come out of breakout rooms. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the evening, Brian Scott. Brian is no longer working after being involved in an accident at work, which means his back was damaged and leading to ongoing conditions and disabilities, and is now living on benefits. He was working as a cardiology nurse at Glasgow Royal Infirmary at the time of his accident. Before that, he worked as a secretarial PA within Scottish HQ, the British Red Cross. In Glasgow, he is a volunteer activist with the Poverty Truth community, through which he also has interactions with On Road Media and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. He has campaigned extensively within the Scottish Parliament, working with MSPs to bring them the lived experience of what it is like to live in poverty. One of his core beliefs is that every child in the UK should have the same opportunities and development, no matter where they begin on the poverty ladder. He will work continuously to give those trapped in poverty the key to free themselves of the struggles and stigma associated with poverty. Welcome, Brian. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think Hannah's just given half of my talk there, but I'll carry on with it anyway. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming along today to this roundtable meeting today. And I would like to welcome you all to what I'm sure you will find is a fruitful discussion. So as you've just heard, my name is Brian Scott, and I've been a volunteer activist with the Poverty Truth Committee for the last 4 years. The Poverty Truth Commission, as it was known then, was founded approximately 10 years ago. If you go to the Poverty Truth Community website, it briefly describes the PTC as a movement for change led by people experiencing poverty, bringing together people experiencing poverty and key decision makers to create change. In summary, the Poverty Truth Community brings together legislators and those in power with community members who have real life experience of poverty and all the problems and traumas that go with it. The Poverty Truth Community members over the past decade have been successful in meeting and briefing the Education Secretary in the Scottish Government regarding the irregularities of the school uniform clothing grant. This resulted in the Scottish Government establishing, and you'll have to excuse the pun here, a uniform amount of clothing grant across Scotland, which did away with the postcode lottery of the previous system. Also, during the first pandemic and lockdown, the Poverty Truth Community, along with the Child Poverty Action Group, successfully met with the Head of Education of Glasgow City Council regarding food vouchers. As you may know, each child who qualified for school meal, thanks to the Scottish Parliament, still got an allowance for food during lockdown. It was up to the local authorities to decide how this money was distributed. Some local authorities paid the money direct into the parents' bank accounts, and others, like Glasgow City Council, decided to distribute farm food vouchers to the children and students. The Poverty Truth Community and the Child Poverty Action Group put forward the argument that not all parents stayed near this food store and it would cost money to travel to the nearest one, thus negating the value of the voucher. Also, there was no real variety of choice in the food that some food stores have. The reality is that in modern Scotland, we are a multicultural society, which means that some young people have special religious or cultural dietary needs. Also, there are more food allergies today, and children have more lifestyle choices in the food that they eat. We argued that paying the value of the food vouchers directly into the parents' bank accounts would allow them to fully meet their children's dietary needs. We were ultimately successful in convincing Glasgow City Council to pay the value of the vouchers to the parents. These are just two examples of the poverty community work and the PTC and policymakers working together to achieve a solution to a problem. At all times, the campaigns and activities of the Poverty Truth Community were led by and instituted by members with lived experience of poverty. I know that later on we're going to discuss the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I would like here to briefly outline the 4 pillars which the Convention is built upon and what they mean. So I'll start by the first one, non-discrimination. This article states that all children should enjoy their rights and never be subjected to any form of discrimination. Second pillar is the best interest of the child or children. This article states that in all actions concerning children, whether undertaken by public or private social welfare institutions, courts of law, administrative authorities, or legislative bodies, the best interests of the child shall be a primary consideration. The third pillar is the right to survival and development. The principle most directly related to children's economic and social rights is formulated in the Right to Life article. This article goes further than just granting the children the right not to be killed. It includes the right to survival and development, which is formulated in Article 6, stroke 2, and states thus, state parties shall ensure to the maximum extent possible the survival and development of the child. And the fourth and final pillar, and it's a really important one, is the views of children. A crucial dimension of the convention is expressed through another principle, the one about respecting the views of the child. In order to know what is actually in the interest of the child, it is logical to listen to him or her. To begin with, I would like to commend the Scottish Parliament in unanimously backing a bill to base all future Scottish legislation regarding children on this convention. It is certainly an enlightened and forward-thinking piece of governance. We'd all like to think that in 2022 in the United Kingdom, we all live up to the great British values of equality for all, equal opportunities, looking after the most vulnerable in our society, helping our fellow citizens when they hit life's difficulties, such as when they're made unemployed, etc. But do we? Do we really? And do we always? I think the answer to that is no, especially regarding children and young people. There are fellow citizens in Scotland who have fallen through the gaps in the system, whether through stresses on our social care system, the benefit system, or through the current economic climate where people are working for low pay and long hours or are caught up in the bureaucracy of the refugee system. No doubt today we will talk a lot about the responsibilities of states and governments regarding the welfare of children and young people. If a state signs up to the UN Charter on Human Rights, then there is an obligation to implement the articles of that charter. But what about us as individuals? What are our responsibilities to our fellow citizens who fall through the gaps or who are ignored by society? I'd like to share with you just now one of my guilty secrets. So this is just between you and us, okay? Doesn't go any further than this. I love to watch on YouTube the videos about the phenomenon of Karens and Kevins. Now, what is a Karen or a Kevin? Well, a Karen or a Kevin is the name given to a person who loves to complain, and they seem to mostly do it in fast food restaurants, about the slightest wee problem, and they make a big deal out of it. The person involved is always quick to invoke the line, "I know my rights." And that got me thinking, yes, we all know our rights, but we are always quick to forget the responsibilities that accompany those rights. Those lucky enough to know about our human rights have to ask ourselves the following questions. Do these rights apply to all my friends and neighbours? If not, why not? And what can I do about it? And if I don't know, then who does? Do we as individuals even know that the UK has signed up to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child? If our friends and neighbours or fellow citizens don't, then it's up to us to inform them about this convention. It is also up to us as individuals to ask those in power, why don't these articles apply to groups such as refugees or those waiting for the right to remain in the UK? They are our responsibility as fellow human beings. It's up to us to make sure they are protected and given the means to thrive and develop in Scotland. After all, they may become full fellow citizens of the UK, and I'm pretty sure that they'll make their voices heard. We can join groups such as the Poverty Truth Community so that jointly we can have the one loud voice to shout out to our politicians that there are children in Scotland and the wider UK who at this moment in time in 2022, for goodness sake, are going hungry. There are children and young people being discriminated against by the very systems implemented to protect them. They are facing mental health trauma stemming from seeing how their family is suffering not only through the cost of living crisis, but through the repercussions of COVID. These are only some of the problems facing children and young people in Scotland today. The United Nations is throwing us a life belt in the form of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Using this and working together, we can unlock the chains that trap children in poverty in Scotland. To use an old cliche, the children are our future. We all want to see them thrive and prosper in their communities and develop into the best person they possibly can be. Together, we can help our younger citizens get there. So thank you for listening to me tonight, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I am honored now to introduce our next speaker for today, who goes by the name CJ. CJ from the Poverty Truth Community is 17 and lives in Glasgow. We will now listen to her pre-recorded audio statement without video.
I'm going to be honest. When I was asked to make a speech for this, I had no idea what to say. I mean, what do you say? Please, what? I mean, no offense, but I think it's common sense. I mean, it's great that this event is happening, but it's also disappointing that in 2022, this is a conversation we need to have. In my opinion, poverty as a young person is embarrassing. Or should I say, feels embarrassing? It feels embarrassing watching your peers do things that you can't do, reach opportunities that you can't plug solely because of your monetary status. When your friends ask you to hang out, you learn to make excuses because the words "I can't afford it" are like acrid bile burning your throat. Soon they stop asking, soon you stop caring. Your monetary status isn't just your status, it becomes your identity. It's like a lonely island where you cannot pass because you can't afford to. It's frankly isolating. You ask me what needs to change, and I'm at a loss for words. I could say more benefits, or I could say more opportunities for poor young people and poor children. But these are points that have been talked about to death. Instead, I wish there was a change in attitude. We ask ourselves how we can fix the problem without really delving deep into what the problem actually is. Why is it that in 2022, so many children still come to school hungry? Why is it that so many children are rehomed because their parents can't afford to keep them? What is the underlying problem here? That's what you need to ask yourselves. Then you can fix it. We need to remember that the problem you're fixing isn't just a problem. It's the lives of thousands of young people living here, including me. And with that, I leave you with this poem. Dirty sneakers steeped in dirt as grubby hands dig. Dig for what? They say salvation comes when the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. Battered bones and tattered jeans run to where? And bitter tears burn as they travel across your cheeks. The stomach pangs in hunger and longs for something else. As cyclamens grow from the rubble at your feet. Undesired, uninvolved, undecided, unresolved.
Thank you to CJ for providing and sharing her message. I'm now delighted to introduce our next speaker, Claire McGilvray. Claire McGilvray is a founding member and director of Making Rights Real. She is passionate about embedding human rights into community development practice and a former member of the Scotland Community for Equality and Human Rights Commission, a trustee with the Children's Parliament in Scotland and the International Association for Community Development, as well as locally in grassroots work for women and children's rights. Claire chaired the World Community Development Conference in Dundee in 2019. Welcome, Claire, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Will, and thanks so much for inviting me here. As Will said, I'm the director of Making Rights Real, which is a new charity in Scotland, working with grassroots communities to name and claim their rights using a human rights-based approach. I'm also an Unfearty, someone who stands up for children's human rights and a trustee with the Children's Parliament. I'll put in the chat box later how you can join the Unfearty movement. There's no doubt that this discussion on poverty and the impact on children's rights is timely. So thanks to the UN and the Poverty Truth community for hosting this event. I've been asked to speak about the importance of looking at child poverty from a children's rights perspective, particularly in the exciting context actually of the Scottish Parliament's attempts to incorporate the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law. And I'm thrilled that we're on course in Scotland to embed children's human rights into Scots law, along with other new laws which are coming to advance human rights. And it's timely because more Scottish children than ever are living with the scourge of poverty. Poverty is a human rights failure, and children's human rights are everyone's business. Children are being failed in Scotland because their economic, social and cultural rights are not being protected by duty bearers. So embedding the UNCRC in Scots law will really provide an opportunity for children, for organisations working with children and the Children's Commissioner to hold duty bearers to account for child poverty. And that includes through legal means. And the state will have to use its maximum available resources to progressively realise children's rights. So this is a real opportunity for children, for their parents, carers, public bodies to learn about and embrace children's rights. But the picture in Scotland isn't rosy. We've heard there from CJ. And we know that children's rights are regressing because of poverty. And I'll say again, children's human rights are everyone's business. We know that more children in Scotland are being deliberately and systematically plunged into poverty by decisions of the UK government. For example, cancelling the universal credit uplift. And that's an attack on children's rights and on the right to an adequate standard of living, and affects children who are already disproportionately impacted by wealth inequality. This is conscious cruelty at its worst. Recent reports by the Coalition of Racial Equality and Rights said that 44% of minority ethnic children in Scotland, even before COVID, are the only child poverty priority group where poverty is still rising in Scotland. And we know that the Child Poverty Development Plan and implementing the Fairer Scotland duty, but children's rights are still severely impacted by poverty, and this is a human rights failure. The UNCRC says that every child has a right to an adequate standard of living, including that which is good enough to meet their physical and social needs and support their development. And that includes children living with a right to adequate housing, to social security, to be able to live a full life, to participate in their community, and also to be able to be heard and having a say on some things that affect them. So time is right to make children's rights real in Scotland. I'm going to tell you about an example that I had today about children's rights being infringed because of poverty. I was visiting a Gypsy Traveller site that we were going to be working with the people who live there. And the children were living with mould in their homes. Their clothes are stored in plastic boxes because of the mould. There are issues with sewage coming up from the drains. Their homes smell of sewage. Their toys have to be thrown away because they're covered in sewage. They're unable to play outside because of the sewage. There are issues with rats and mice infestations. Some of these children are living in low-income families with disabilities, and there's food insecurity. The local authority seems unresponsive, plenty talk, loads of strategies, things written down, but there's no action on these issues. So nothing changes. Children are living with these infringements daily, and that's what the state is responsible for. So children's rights are everyone's business. At Making Rights Real, we're going to be working alongside these children and their families to use a rights-based approach to influence change. We work in a participative process with people to document the evidence of their lives and to campaign for change on the issues that affect them. And we see poverty as a children's rights issue, but we also see human rights solutions to some of those issues. There's an international framework that can help public authorities take action and demonstrate accountability on human rights. And for children and carers, they would also then be able to use these rights in law. So we could be using a children's rights-based approach much more in practice in Scotland, and that would embed dignity and respect into our systems, and it can deliver what children need to thrive. It also can transform the power relationships between children as rights holders and public authorities being responsible for children's rights. So at Making Rights Real, we're about supporting communities to use a rights-based approach in practice. There's definitely opportunities in Scotland for that. And we know that children can participate in the big issues that have impact on them. We as adults often write children off, but if we look at the amazing work of the Children's Parliament or Together, there are countless examples of children influencing really big issues like the places where they live, like what it's like to live in poverty, like how alcohol impacts on children in their lives, like campaigning for Scotland to adopt the UNCRC into law. A lot of that work is led by children. So human rights for children are everyone's business. It's not just the responsibility for people who have children and families in their job titles. It's for all of us. It's for all public service providers to engage with children on the big issues like poverty, and that we need children to be involved in framing how their abuses are actually going to be resolved. So using a children's human rights-based approach to address poverty is one way of addressing these massive issues of poverty in a framework that works. The time's right now for action. The UNCRC law is coming, and the system and culture change that we need to be accompanying that gives us a real opportunity. So my plea to you is to do what you can do in your life and your work to really make children's rights real.
Thank you so much for that really insightful presentation, Claire. I'm just going to introduce to you our next speaker, who is Cameron Wong McDermott, who is speaking today on behalf of the children of the Office of the Children and Young People's Commissioner Scotland. Cameron works as a policy officer at the Office of the Children and Young People's Commissioner's Office. He is a human rights lawyer and has previously worked as a legal advisor in the European Court of Human Rights. Welcome, Cameron. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, and thank you to UN House and the Poverty Truth community for inviting me to this roundtable to speak on behalf of the Commissioner. I've been asked to speak with you all briefly about the impact of poverty on children and young people's rights, but I'll also provide a short update on the current status of incorporation of the UNCRC into Scots law. To begin with, it's important to state that poverty is a human rights issue. Even before COVID, poverty was the biggest human rights issues facing children in Scotland. but now it's even worse. The UNCRC doesn't contain a specific right to freedom from poverty. Rather, what it does is it takes a holistic approach to ensure that children have the right to live free from poverty. Under the UNCRC, children have the right to an adequate standard of living, a safe, warm place to live, and good, nutritious food. They also have the right to benefit from social security and have their family supported. The effects of the pandemic, which are still becoming clear, have only served to make a dire situation worse for those living in poverty, or those only just getting by. The cost of living crisis also threatens to drag more and more children and their families into poverty. Poverty affects every single aspect of a child's life, including their ability to learn, their mental health and their physical health, their development, their ability to socialise and engage in cultural activities, but also their future opportunities. One child summarised how living in poverty can feel, telling us, "When you're poor, you give up on your dreams." I think that's a very stark quote. We know some groups are disproportionately affected by poverty. They include families with a disabled child or parent, care experienced Black and minority ethnic children, young carers, children of prisoners, children in single parent families, larger families. Their rights must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. Children and young people are acutely aware of what poverty means and how it impacts on the rights of families who experience it. One young person recently told me, "When I think of poverty, I think of inequality. It's not fair and it's not right." And another 12-year-old told Bruce, the commissioner, "The most unfair thing is the government knows families are going through hard times, but they decide not to do anything about it." They're right. Poverty is not inevitable. And as the former special representative on extreme poverty has said, poverty in the UK is caused and exacerbated by political decisions. It's on that note that we therefore welcome the Scottish Government's Child Poverty Delivery Plan, which was recently published and is better known as Best Starts, Bright Futures. Several of the measures outlined in that plan, particularly the increase in the Scottish child payment and the focus on social security powers that are available in Scotland, as well as expansion of free school meals, all represent a positive step in the right direction. However, the Scottish Government statutory interim targets are set for 2024. And what the latest statistics show is that Scotland is not on track to meet those targets. Far too many children and families are still locked into poverty. Now, as we begin the long road to recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and also in light of the increasing cost of living, we believe that in some areas, the Scottish Government will have to go even further if it's to remain on track to meet its 2030 statutory targets. Turning to incorporation of the UNCRC. Now, incorporation of the UNCRC is going to put children's rights into the heart of everything we do in Scotland. It takes the international promises we've signed up to and gives them real force in Scotland. It is the most important thing Scotland can do to protect the rights of children and young people. It's going to significantly change the way that government at all levels have to approach child poverty. It's no longer going to be good enough to simply pay lip service to children's rights. Those rights will be fundamental when it comes to policies, legislation, and budgets. The UNCRC demands children are treated as human beings, not simply as passive objects of care and charity. As you all know, it was with great celebration across Scotland that the UNCRC Incorporation Scotland Bill was passed unanimously in March 2021. However, as you also all be aware, in October 2021, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom found that specific areas of the bill go beyond the powers of the Scottish Parliament. The bill was then referred back to the Scottish Parliament for reconsideration. Now, after a significant delay, which was strongly criticised by our office and others, last month, the Scottish Government set out the necessary changes to the bill to address the judgment. A short consultation on these proposals is going to conclude, I believe, this week. Thereafter, the Scottish Government have committed to bring forward amendments to the bill. An update on those timescales for the Scottish Parliament's reconsideration of the amendments is also expected this week. The delays and lack of urgency over the last year have been really concerning, but the commitment to the incorporation of the UNCRC, but also to other human rights treaties, remain. And only with a legal framework for accountability on economic, social, and cultural rights will we get the real change that we need in Scotland. I want to touch a little bit on, very quickly, on participation rights, which both Brian and Claire touched upon in their talk. What we need to do in Scotland is also to look at children and young people to properly understand how poverty affects their lives. In particular, measures designed to tackle child poverty in Scotland have to pay particular attention to the needs and the voices of children and young people whose rights are most at risk. However, despite obligations under Article 12 of the UNCRC, children in Scotland remain excluded from many decision-making processes concerning them, or not even involved in those processes at all. Young people have consistently told us that they feel that their participation, both at the national and international levels, is tokenistic, often to meet diversity requirements, and that they're sometimes heard, but don't feel that their opinions and lived experiences are considered meaningfully. We aren't protecting children and young people by excluding their voices and their experiences. We have to include children and young people's right to be involved in decision-making processes in line with state obligations under the UNCRC. Time and time again, children have told us they want to be part of the solution. I'll end on a quote from one young child who told me, "Our rights shouldn't be ignored when decisions affecting us are being made." Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Cameron. That's such a thoughtful and comprehensive and coherent presentation. Thank you. I'm now going to read a statement on child poverty, the cost of living, and the UNCRC from the Tackling Child Poverty Strategy Unit of the Scottish Government on behalf of the relevant Scottish Government ministers. The UNCRC bill is a landmark piece of legislation that aims to deliver a proactive culture of everyday accountability for children's rights across public services in Scotland. It would require all Scotland's public authorities to ensure the protection of children's rights in their decision-making and service delivery, and make it unlawful for public authorities to act incompatibly with the UNCRC requirements as set out in the bill. Although, as we've heard from Cameron, although the Supreme Court judgment has meant that the bill cannot receive royal assent in its current form, on 24th of May, the Deputy First Minister made a statement to Parliament setting out how we propose to amend the bill to address that judgment. We are currently undertaking targeted stakeholder engagement to ensure that those who have lobbied passionately for this bill understand the changes that are being made and why. While we have been considering the way forward for this legislation, we published a 3-year implementation plan that sets out how we have continued to support the delivery of a fundamental shift in how children's rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled in Scotland. This shift in children's rights is part of our ambition for Scotland to be the best place in the world to grow up. Alongside our efforts to protect children's rights, our work to tackle child poverty and the cost of living crisis play an essential part in supporting children to grow up safe, loved, and respected, and to be able to achieve their potential. We are acutely aware that households across the country are facing a serious cost of living crisis, exacerbated by the UK government's approach to Brexit. Those on the lowest incomes are being hit the hardest, with many of these households likely to then carry an increased burden of debt. The recent cost of living measures announced by the UK government are welcome, but fall far short of what is needed to help the poorest households struggling now with the cost of living crisis. To support those most in need, we are investing £770 million this year in cost of living support, including through a range of low-income benefits not available elsewhere in the UK. This includes carers allowance supplement, bridging payments to those in receipt of school meals, and our 5 family benefits, one of which is the Scottish Child Payment. Tackling child poverty is the Scottish Government national mission, and we know it will take all in society to work together to deliver the change needed. In March of this year, we published Best Start, Bright Futures, our second Tackling Child Poverty delivery plan, setting out the bold and ambitious actions that we will take alongside our partners across Scotland to provide the support families need both immediately and in the medium to longer term. We announced up to 113 million extra funding for this year through this Tackling Child Poverty delivery plan. This includes further increasing Scottish Child Payment to £25 per week by the end of 2022. By that time, the Scottish Government's package of 5 family benefits for low-income families will be worth up to £10,000 by the time a family's first child turns 6, and £9,700 for second and subsequent children. The actions set out in Best Start, Bright Futures are projected to drive child poverty in Scotland to the lowest levels in 30 years, with current projections suggesting 60,000 fewer children could live in relative poverty by 2023 compared to 2017, from 17% to 17% from 24%. Through these actions, we can deliver sustainable progress towards our 2030 child poverty targets. But we know that we cannot do this alone. It takes all of us across Scotland working together to deliver the support children and their families need, and to drive progress towards a fairer, more prosperous Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. And with that, we will now move on to our next session of the evening and move into 4 separate breakout rooms led by our facilitators to discuss what we have heard and to ask any questions you may have, which can then be presented to our speakers in the Q&A session afterwards. Everyone, please note that each rapporteur will be recording the breakout rooms that they are each in. So all of the breakout rooms will be recorded, as well as this current main session. And without further ado, I'll kindly ask Andy or Mark to please open the breakout rooms. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had good discussions in your breakout rooms. And firstly, I would like to invite somebody that hopefully the groups appointed in each of the groups to give a small presentation or little summary of what was discussed. And then we'll go on from there. So someone from group 1.
We didn't actually appoint anybody, but can give you a very quick one.
That'll be perfect. Thank you, Elaine.
we talked about how it's actually really important to get a proper understanding of what children and young people are saying, what their lived experience of poverty is, rather than making assumptions. We talked about issues around stigma and poverty, and then we talked specifically about issues around housing and the cost of living crisis.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Somebody from group 2?
Hi, can I just say thank you to my group? I thought we had a very good discussion, very informed discussion, because we had some excellent people in it. So Elena was going to do the feedback. Thank you.
Some interesting discussions really in our group. I really enjoyed it. It was really thought-provoking. We basically talked about the rights and responsibilities we have as individuals, and who it is and that we need to go to at firsthand, and more of like talking and getting to know the people that we're working with more. And it's not just a tick box system and move on to the next family. It's more of sitting down and really understanding what there is that we need to do, and also how we can respond to the UK Parliament as well, and their opposition.
Thank you very much, Alina. Group 3 was my group, and Lydia was going to, I'll pass the floor to Lydia.
Hi. So our conversation was focused quite a lot on thinking about schools and educational institutions to start off with. And we talked about a kind of lack of real understanding around what the UN CRC means in practice, and the realities of implementing a rights-based approach, and the importance of overcoming kind of siloed thinking in institutions where people feel like, oh, we're looking at equalities this year, so we can't look at children's rights, rather than seeing rights as something that underpins all of this. And we spoke about the culture change that's required, and also touched upon the fact that facilitating this change creates a resource requirement, whether it's like a time resource or a financial resource, and that it's important to be able to invest in this transformation and having the funding and the space to do that within various organisations. And then we spoke about the fact that poverty itself needs to be mainstreamed and destigmatised and be less hidden, and also issues around access to education and the differential access to their rights that children have that live in rural areas versus urban areas, and issues of transport. I think that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. A representative from Group 4?
Yeah, that was a group that I facilitated, and Hannah was a rapporteur. I don't know, Hannah, do you want to report back, or do you want me to do it?
I am happy with either, Brian.
Okay, I'll leave it in your capable hands then.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So our group, we mostly talked about food. We started off in the discussions around the differences between food pantries and food banks. We talked about the role that churches play in that. I won't go into too much detail, but we talked about how the disadvantages of going to churches for food in that their system doesn't necessarily give people, and I say churches quite broadly, does not necessarily mean all churches, but that it doesn't necessarily give people the choice in what to eat. And it was highlighted that this is really important for people to have a choice in what to eat. There was also the price of food going up and the impact that that will have in terms of the long-term detrimental health, health issues for children and communities. One of the members in our group talked about the link between low socioeconomic backgrounds and the risk of heart disease and sclerosis, I believe, in children, and how most of the food is preserved food, and that is one of the biggest reasons why that is, how there's a big limit on how much nutrition that is provided, and that then led on to a conversation about fresh food and veg, and the importance of access and use of that. That was then, we then touched a little bit on stigma, and then we moved on to what does poverty mean to you, and a few people came in on that, on what poverty means to them. One said that poverty can be described as not having enough means for essential needs for children. The cost of living is so high, and that then led on to discussions on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the importance of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and more particularly importance of the word all, so that no one is missed out with the convention. And then we moved on to what is the way forward, we then came back onto the topic of food. And I will stop here before I keep rambling on. But hopefully this will all be encapsulated in the report, in the follow-up report.
Thank you, Hannah. That was a fantastic summary. We're now going to move on to the Q&A part of the session. Any questions can be directed towards the chat, and I will read them out and provide them with a direction as to who is most appropriate. But there are a lot of fantastically talented people here today, so if anyone else feels that they would more appropriately be able to answer, then please do raise your hand and I can bring them in. So it's a discussion. The first one that I actually wanted to ask, which was maybe towards Claire or Brian or Elaine, was talking about the culture shift and what observations you may have seen on changing the culture over time, especially maybe considering COVID or considering the current cost of living crisis, and how things are changing in your experiences talking to young people and children.
I don't mind going if that's useful. What I see that needs to happen in terms of a culture shift is actually massive, because public authorities are going to be held responsible for children's rights in law. So it's justiciable. They need to put in place a massive culture shift and a massive learning programme for their staff at every level to be engaging with children's rights. As I said, children's rights are responsibility of housing officers, of teachers, of social workers, and that culture shift needs to happen. There needs also to be a culture shift as well in terms of how poverty is treated. I know I see Paul there. Hi, Paul McLennan. Nice to see you. And when I was in East Lothian, I was part of the East Lothian Poverty Commission, and that was a big part of the Poverty Commission, was changing that culture of stigma around poverty. Was a huge part of that. So there needs to be a massive culture change around that as well. So lots of things needs to happen. Some work already going on. I know Maxine's here from Education Scotland. She'd be brilliant to talk about what's happening from the education side of embedding a rights-based approach for children, but lots to do still.
Can I bring in Brian and then maybe Paul and Maxine afterwards? So Brian first.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Yeah, I think there's regarding a culture shift. I think what we need to do is take the narrative away from like certain right-wing papers that can turn words like rights into a dirty word, so that people are scared to talk about rights. It's like saying, yes, I know my human rights, I know what I want to do, like I was talking about earlier, where rights are something that we should be proud of having. We should be proud that we stay in a country that wants to have rights for all of their citizens, irrespective of their background. So we need to take the narrative away from certain types of politicians and certain types of mainstream media. Also regarding poverty, I had hoped that during COVID, because quite a lot of people who would never have thought they'd experience poverty did experience it, then the attitude towards people who have been and still are in poverty would have changed. But you're starting to see things going back to the way they were, where there's the kind of mask is fallen from the Conservative Party, where they are doing things to help the cost of living crisis, but occasionally you get one minister or two ministers that puts the blame on people, where they should go out and if they've not got enough money, then they should go and get another job, things like that. So we have to keep our eyes and ears open, that we don't let it sit back. And in Scotland, especially in the next couple of years, we need to keep our voices loud, because there's going to be so many competing political challenges. I'm thinking of the quest for a referendum next year, that we need to keep shouting so that the voices of children who are experiencing poverty, adults who are experiencing poverty and food crisis and fuel crisis, their voices are still heard.
Thank you very much, Brian. Can I bring in Paul next? Oh, I don't know if his connection might have gone there. Can I bring in Maxine?
Hi, Will, thank you. Yeah, I'm not going to say too much, but just from an education perspective, yes, we have huge demands for training, professional learning, advice and support, as I've already said, but we still have a huge issue with practitioners wanting to link rights and responsibilities. And you know and I've been asked very recently, when did rights and responsibilities become separated? And you know, having to say, well, they've never actually been connected in the first place. It's something that's been happened. It's something that's been constructed. It wasn't ever there. So you know, there's a lot of work to be done around that. And there's almost like a mantra that you can't have something for nothing. So you can't have rights without responsibilities. And that, you know, is quite concerning. And when you're thinking about poverty, you know, it's almost like children and young people are therefore put in a situation where they think, well, I don't have enough to eat this is that because I have done something wrong? Is that because I haven't been responsible? You know, so this is what children are starting to think because of this whole connection of rights and responsibilities. I can't comment on anything political because I am a civil servant, but you know that there are issues that are out there that we need to address, perhaps with the political parties. And I think that point about, I think it was Brian that said it about, I know my rights. Do you? And we hear that all the time. Do you really? And I don't think a lot of people do. They just think they do. So I think getting that back and pulling that back and really challenging that when people say, I know my rights, and saying, do you really know your rights? Because do you know what's in the UNCRC? Do you know what's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? You know, and the other human rights treaties? Do you really know, or are you just repeating what you've heard in the media? So that's from my perspective, because I know this isn't just an education focused event. So
thank you very much, Maxine. Paul, are you able to make a comment at this time? Is your internet holding up? I think you might be muted, Paul. Oh, there we go.
Well, is that myself?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. A couple of things I think for me, I mentioned it in our group. There's the Social Security Committee that I sit on just now is having an inquiry into debt and poverty in Scotland, and we've taken probably around about 6 or 7 sessions around about that. That report is due out towards the end of June, and there'll be a debate in the Parliament probably around about September, October time. One of the key issues that has come through, obviously, is fuel poverty, which I think is having a major impact, particularly on families. And I think I mentioned within our group, there was a report out just last week by Glasgow University. It looked at the impact of austerity, particularly on mortality rates, and the impact that that's had. And I think we can't lose sight of that. The real focus, I think, which will need to be in the next year or two, will be on the cost of living crisis and the impact it has on, in terms of housing, in terms of fuel poverty, and how that impacts on families and particularly children. So there's a real focus, I think, needs to be done on that. As I said, that report is due out towards the end of June, and there will be a debate. And I think there's maybe an opportunity around about that inquiry, maybe to have a similar kind of forum to this, to talk about what the outcome of that, because that can't just be discussed within the Parliament. I think that needs to be a broader discussion around about what the Parliament needs to do. And I'm talking about the broader Parliament, not just the Scottish Government, but in terms of where we all go with this. And it's not politicised. I think we've made progress. We need to make more, but we need to have that debate again. I think that's maybe an opportunity, well, on the back of this, maybe to have a follow-up event in the back of the report that's due out.
A follow-up event on the back of the report sounds fantastic. I'm sure that UN House and Poverty Truth community would be supportive of that entirely. Are there anyone else who has any other questions? Otherwise, I'll pass on to Elaine, followed by Gary for the closing. Okay, thank you everyone for participating in the breakout rooms and the Q&A. It was a fantastic discussion by all. I'm now going to pass on to Elaine.
Thank you. I think it's really important at the end of our time together to come back to the beginning, to when we heard from CJ about her concerns for child poverty and her questions and her challenge to us all. The challenge to listen to what young people want to tell us and the challenge to act on what we hear. You need to remember, she told us, that the problem you're fixing here isn't just a problem. It's the lives of thousands of young people living here, including me. Matthew is 13 and he says, the people who are making all the decisions, they need to be listening to us. A lot of what they think we're worried about might not be right. Please don't just listen to teachers and other adults. Take the time to sit down and talk with us. Suzanne is 15 and she says, I've had to grow up so fast. I worry about how my mum and I are going to make our money last just a little bit longer, about how if we have a treat now, we can't have a jug of milk later. I have such terrible guilty feelings. I'm hungry, but I don't want to eat too much because my mum is hungry too. And I know she's going without food to leave enough for me. Chris is 10. He puts his coat on when he goes to the bathroom as his family can only afford to heat one room. Mariam skips school on non-uniform days to avoid being bullied for not wearing the right trainers. In 2019, to mark the 30th anniversary of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, we asked a group of children in Glasgow what made them happy, what made them feel safe, and created a hot air balloon together of their dreams. And I think we're able to see the photograph of that just now. Thank you. So we asked them, what makes you happy? And they said, friends, family, having a safe place to play, food, going for a walk, my mum, creativity, acceptance, love, making new friends, books, having a voice, being heard, holidays, no more food banks, my dog, jumping, playing Fortnite, laughing, coming home. The names in the basket are the names of the children who took part. The flames are what we can all do to help the balloon fly. As CJ says, no offence, but it's common sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That's incredibly moving, and it's a great return to what CJ said at the beginning with your words at the end. So thank you for that. And in fact, thank you, Elaine and Brian, for working with us at UN House. And we are so pleased that the Poverty Truth community has joined us in this project. And it's not finishing with this roundtable. This is just a stepping stone towards a second part of the project, which will be the writing of this report and our launch, our joint launch on the 17th of October, which is the UN Day on the Elimination of Poverty. So we're working again with the Poverty Truth community and with our volunteer interns at UN House. We'll be writing a report, and we hope that everyone who's attending will be able to circulate that to the widest possible networks and communities throughout Scotland. I think what I've learned from today, amongst many, many things, but one is just how important our collaborative partnerships are. That wherever you are based and whatever thoughts you have, they're part of what makes us in Scotland have a belief in the universalism of social justice. And I'm just so delighted to have heard from everyone, especially perhaps our breakout groups, because in my breakout group 3, there were some really very thoughtful contributions, as there obviously were in 1, 2, and 4. So please do keep in touch with us. And I'm going to ask Will or Hannah to put in the chat our website, so you can always get in touch through our website, or in fact through hello@unhscotland.org.uk. And let me just say, as we come to the end of this, it's been a transformatory meeting for many of us, and I hope that transformation will continue. Thank you everyone for being with us, and I pass you now back to Will to say a final goodbye.
Thank you very much, everyone, for attending and your contributions. I think that, as Gary, I agree with everything Gary said and the insightful contributions everyone has made tonight, and how in this we're moving towards, it's not, this roundtable obviously isn't the end, but moving on towards the next steps and having further roundtables on the UN Elimination of Poverty Day on the 17th of October. But anyways, thank you all for attending, and almost exactly on 7 o'clock, that's the end of the event for today. And please, everyone, do stay in touch.
Thank you.